evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
That's better. We have the tea lights. It's a poetry reading, right? Call and response. My name is Dr. Carlin Crowley. I'm the director of the Cassandra Voss Center, a professor of English and Women's and Gender Studies here at St. Norbert College, and welcome to the Cassandra Voss Center.
And I'm Jaime Gonzalez. I'm the assistant director here at the Cassandra Voss Center. Yeah, so welcome. Thank you for being here. This is Heid Erdrich's first event at St. Norbert College, but she's actually been here since the beginning of the week and has been doing a lot of stuff at UW Green Bay as well. So I'm going to now invite our two student staff people up to here to get you started and to introduce Heid and get the event going. So thank you for being here.
Before we get started, I would like to share St. Norbert's recently released Land Acknowledgement Statement, which is the first step in discussion and action around recognizing the significance of Native American culture and history in this area. Land Acknowledgement Statement. In the spirit of the Norbertine value of stabilitas loci, a deep commitment to the local community, we acknowledge this land as the ancestral home of the Menominee Nation and current home to the Oneida Nation, which holds historical, cultural, and sacred significance to the community. We acknowledge the living history and contributions of the Indigenous communities that inhabited this land prior to the establishment of St. Norbert College, as well as the sovereign Native American nations who continue to contribute to the flourishing of our communities.
Thank you, Jasmine. So I have the joyous responsibility of introducing our speaker tonight. And I want to welcome you to the center and say that we are delighted to welcome award-winning poet, writer, and filmmaker Heid Erdrich to the Cassandra Voss Center. With degrees from Dartmouth College and 2 master's degrees in poetry and fiction from Johns Hopkins University, Heid is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including her dynamic and powerful collection, Curator of Ephemera, at the New Museum of Archaic Media, which she will be sharing with us tonight. Her writing has won awards from the Minnesota State Arts Board, Bush Foundation, the Loft Literary Center, and First Peoples Fund. Heid has also recently stepped into nonfiction work with her cookbook, Original Local, Indigenous Foods, Stories, and Recipes from the Upper Midwest, which we will be looking more into tomorrow at a 3 p.m. lecture in Fort Howard Theater. All are welcome. In addition to her writing, Heid is the creator of poetry films, which have been screened widely at festivals and have won Best of Fest and a Best Experimental Short Film Award. These videos are visually fascinating with powerful imagery tying directly into Heid's even more powerful words. In addition to this wordcraft, Heid is an independent scholar and curator, a playwright, and founding publisher of Wigwas Press, an Ojibwe language publisher. She teaches the MFA Creative Writing Program of Augsburg College. Heid grew up in Wahpeton, North Dakota, and is Ojibwe enrolled at Turtle Mountain. She's now visiting us from Minnesota, where she lives with her husband, kids, and feisty Jack Russell Terrier. Please join me today in welcoming Heid Erdrich. Thank you.
Microphone picking me up? No. How about there? No. No? All right, well, we're going to try, I'll try talking to you while we get this sorted out. Thanks so much. I'm Heid Erdrich, and I am so grateful for that kind introduction, and I'm so grateful to be here today on Menominee and Oneida land, and grateful to the Menominee and Oneida people I talked to over the last couple of days for conversations and for allowing me to speak here without asking permission in the first place, so I'm really grateful. I have spent some time in De Pere before, even though this is my first public parents here. My sister lived here in the late 1990s, early 2000s. She was a pediatrician for the United Nations. She and her husband were. So if you're around 18, 19, 20, even 21 years old, and you were born and you were a United Tribal member, they might have been your first doctors. So they live close to here in De Pere, and we used to walk around. Things have changed a lot. It's really great to see this kind of energy and the excitement that the town has. So how's my volume if I start reading? Will you be able to hear me? Okay. All right, so I'm going to try reading without my microphone, but I am not going to sacrifice my glasses because you can't really read without being able to see the words, although a few of them I have somewhat memorized. I'm going to read from Curator of Ephemera at the New Museum for Archaic Media, my most recent book of poems, which is a poem collection that focuses on all the mistakes we make, even though we have more and more kinds of media all the time, and how human beings, through the course of time.
Okay. Oh, that's much better, right? Sorry.
How's that? Speaking me up? Okay, great. So human beings, through the course of time, have invented media. Everything from fires that people would put on a beach to tell people that a whale had come up and they had to come and get the food before the tide came in, to the first recordings which were done on copper wire. Can you imagine that? Like there was some wire that, I don't even know how it happened. To our cell phones, which are obsolete in a year, even though people give their lives in conflicts all over the globe for the rare minerals that are used. So the idea of all the media we have is quickly archaic, right? The archaic media wing of the ephemeral curation that we have to do. Everything is going to disappear. Everything we do with light. So the book is a lot about mistakes that we make, things we misunderstand. This one is a little bit of a poem that kind of lays down the ideas for you, and then you hear about the different media, and then you hear references to it later. The first signs of human communication were done by women in caves, and the reason we know that these individuals were women is that they have forensic anthropologists who do the understanding of what the human hand is shaped like, and what a woman's hand is shaped like, and what a child's hand is shaped like is different from what a man's hand has been over time. So they know that these first artworks and first gestural tracings are from women. Autobiography as gesture. All that I meant, all my intent, what I had to say, carpal tunnel pulses a flow of sparks, so I print with light on light. Indelible information encodes, then deletes. Still the paths in my hands, faint remains. No, not as if sparks in dark liquid of mind could express, impress the last medium. Delete to the bone, bone's deep chambers, down to what's left. What's been left, our bodies, nothing less. Our hands, the thumb beloved, gesture trace, the other's touch, destroying breath, fluted traces in ancestral caves, women and children on rainy days, finger waves in clay, a mania of hands, akimbo, askance, verbal as dance. They touched and touched and touched. Do not touch. What I had to say, I intend, not portend. In sign and shrug, implied, vibe, eye stray, key cached, digital capture, smoke and signal, blown through hand formed bone hoop, bite and bark, bird cutouts of my dream song, template for black bear, humpback, and hunch a wolverine. My head tilts, my eyes bat, my breath frets across millennia, delicate antiquities. Try not to breathe. Future fragility, not to touch. All that I meant, all my intent, what I had to say I stroked instead. So that's autobiography as gesture, and it has lots of holes in it. I think you can probably hear them. The idea that a message that you get, in the future, the message you get will not make sense anymore, right? There'll be little holes in it. But we don't really know the holes we're reading in the past. We don't know how to fill things in. We think we understand things about the past. We think we understand things between one another sometimes. And there's a lot of little gaps in it. So if you look at the poem on the page, there are little gaps in it. We have to kind of figure out what would go in there. And the idea that stroking is a gesture, a human gesture of affection, but it's also what we call when we type, right? We stroke, keystrokes. So there's a big difference between a keystroke and a stroke. One of the big mistakes I think Americans make is not reading their own artwork, their own. What do you think the main artwork in the United States is? What is the biggest creative industry, the biggest created, most well known? What do you think it is? I'll give you a hint. It's a huge industry. Music? Music's big and it goes a lot of places. Film is even bigger, right?
Right.
Right. So Americans are known as film artists, as if our whole culture contributes to these things. And I think we often don't look at the metaphors that are in our films. When 9/11 happened and the buildings fell, people said, I can't believe it, I can't imagine this, is this real? This has never happened before. And I thought, well, it's been in cartoons with cartoon villains from as long as I can remember. There's always some terrorists trying to blow up a building in all the old cartoons. And then most recently, there was an obsession with zombies, right? So I asked myself, what's the metaphor there? What is that metaphor of, the other coming and being, we can't satiate them, they're starving, right? So anybody want to say what they think? You can hold on to the thought, what's the metaphor for? I had my own ideas. This piece is also a film, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But it starts with a quote. I overheard some people in a coffee shop saying to one another, one said to the other, who was very made up and very goth-like, oh, what kind of look were you going for there? And the other person said, I was going for that undead fairy look. I was like, is that a thing, undead fairy? So this is the undead fairy poem. Pale and smoky eye, puny, bruised bully, thin as a wing, victim, rampant in a fierce corset. That look I'd never liked. Shards of black lace or tattered chiffon trailing over an arm brace and a crossbow. Lidded glances. That look I know. That look comes around every decade or so. Panting, waxy vampires, sexy undead. Hipster zombies, ravishing aliens, punk voodoo queens. Goth goeth before and after the fall. And we've seen it all before, only this time the tenor shifts. What we know, we are already eating each other. We are already part of this. Plaid-skirted co-eds at colleges in the 70s, we ate them. Drunken Midwestern youth by the quarry, we devoured by the score. We are already eating each other. We are already part of this. Mother's veins open, bleed copper and black, leave a sheen on the lips. Machines drink and drink what we think is clean, then starting again. Already eating each other, we are already part of this. Mouthfeel is all gorgeous umami, tender children like veal in a school bus. We are eating you all right now. I myself have eaten you all already, with fries and a beer. You did not satisfy. What I want now is an undead fairy, a palate cleanser, a poof of foam, squid ink and whisked cream, pomegranate syrup and salty swirls that bleed deeply, tasty, yes. But an hour later, we are already eating each other. We are already part of this. So there's a film version of that you can get to in the book by using your little QR code reader. Just click on it and you can see it. And if we can see it, it's really short. And I made the film, I'll tell you about it while Jaime gets it up. I made the film with my collaborator, Jonathan Thunder, and he's a visual artist as well as an animator, and together using voices of my children and a bunch of things I took pictures of in this short. Oh, we got a Heid video? Yeah. We made this short piece. I started doing home films to get the idea of media into my books, and also for people who don't access poetry really well. If you look at these, you understand them better, I think, sometimes than if you just hear them or read them. It is down a bit, and it's called Undead Fairy. It's at the, yep, that's it. Okay, and you want to make it full screen. Undead Fairy goes great with India Pale Ale.
What kind of look were you going for there?
I was going for the undead fairy.
Pale and smoky eye, puny, bruised, bullied, thin as a wing, victim rampant in a fierce corset. That look I never liked. Shards of black lace or tattered chiffon trailing over an arm brace and a crossbow. Lidded glances, that look I know. That look comes around every decade or so. Panting, waxy vampires, sexy undead. Hipster zombies, ravishing aliens, punk voodoo queens. Goth goeth before and after the fall. We've seen it all before, only this time the tenor shifts. What we know. We are already eating each other. We are already part of this. Plaid-skirting poets, colleges in the 70s, we ate them. Drunken Midwestern youth by the quart. I had to stop it. It's just not. It's not rendering totally. So, but you can see this. You can see them online. You can just Google put my name into a search, and you'll find several of these poem films that I've worked on. Now, yeah, they're a little weird. They are. One time I showed them to a huge group of professors, and somebody came up and said, "That was a little scary." And I said, "I think copper mines are scary." So. The idea that we're the consumption of all these things, all of the extraction industries, being frightening, and part of maybe what that metaphor of the zombies is, and how needing more and more and more. Why that is something that somehow subconsciously we're frightened of. And I think that if we do another one, if we load it up first, it'll be ready, so see if we'll do another one later. So I'm from North Dakota, and I used to know the state when I was a kid, when it was really dark there, and you could see all the stars, and there weren't very many farm lights, and there was no industry in most of the state. There's agriculture and a very small line in the eastern I grew up. But when you went out onto the prairie and further into the Badlands, it was completely dark. You didn't see people, saw a lot of animals. And now, with the boom, the oil boom, things have changed. And I read this little quote in the Conservation Alliance from Native Sun News in 2015, and it gave me an idea for a poem. Our burning night sky shames us to the world. It is prairie skies that define a prairie landscape, as well as a prairie inhabitant. Desecration of those skies runs contrary to our conservative character and native awakening. So I love the idea that we've desecrated something that we don't even inhabit, the sky, that people thought of that as contrary to conservative notions. And this is called hang fire. Depth of dark air between us, we sense all things suspended. How tenderly we glance at earth in her black velvet, little strings of farmyard lights outside tiny prairie towns, glitter of lit roads appear to adorn her. How tender our sentiment at cruising altitude. As soon as we've taken off, we want her back. Depth of heaven between us, we sense nothing and all. We wonder what's out there. Then intercede the flares, 100 miles of red eyes, a forever of red lights that dim but do not end. Where once the darkest dark dropped through to still more dark, where even a new moon could reflect in our eyes, where that gleam alone could be our guide, out of sage scent and tumbled canyon, out of a constant quiet, out of that profound suspension relieved of all things human. Reason became quickening, became our fire, our own fire, lit in a pact that we made with the sky. Soon our gaze strayed from the sky to flickers of dark sparks, of stories, embers of memory. We banked to make a future, to fashion foolish notions. How quickly we returned to gazing as if above it, turned all to sentiment, all suspended. Once we own it, we cannot unown our fire. Once we suspended fire in the night sky, we could no longer see in the dark, and darkness deserted us. We knew then the infinity of our fire, and how our fire hangs on us, and how we must hang with fire. So if you looked at that on your own, you'd figure out I was trying to imagine the moment where we realized we were in control of fire, human beings, and what that means for what happens in the world now, right? All combustion remains with us in some way. Sometimes I stop in the middle of my readings and ask if anybody has a question. Does anybody have a question they want to ask or comment? You hear me okay? Yeah, top.
Where do you get the most inspiration from? What location do you go to?
Oh, like what location do I go to become inspired and write?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter as long as there's coffee involved. I can write anywhere as long as there's coffee. But I do often write on planes, and that poem, I got the inkling of it from that quote, and then from being in a plane and looking down at how dark it was, but you could still see little lights, and then the flares from the gas that was being burned off in the middle of North Dakota started, and then it just went on all the way through Montana. These flares and these red lights from towers. And I'm old enough to have seen it when it was very dark, when you flew west from Minnesota to Washington State, when there were areas where it was just so dark you thought, is there anything down there? But that's not true anymore. So yeah, so as long as there's coffee, and oftentimes on a plane, I get an idea. So luckily I fly a lot, but I don't have any problem getting ideas, and I always have. more ideas than I can ever get to. All right, some of the poems in this collection are meant to be a little bit humorous, so I'm going to read one. There's a film for this one too, and it's called Indigenous Elvis Works the Medicine Line. Does anybody know what the medicine line is? Do you know what that phrase means? It's an English translation for what Native people on the Canadian border first called it when they learned that there was going to be a border. Many of you have seen the Canadian border in beyond Minnesota, like in North Dakota, Montana, out west. I mean, it's just vast. There's just no way that anybody would know where it is. There's just vast fields, and you know, how would you know if you're on the border on this side or on this side? It's impossible to really know. So, for the people who lived on both sides of that border, they were like, well, there's supposedly a line, you know, something here, but it's just medicine. It's just spiritual. It's just an idea, a concept. So. My reservation is close to the Canadian border, and when we go there sometimes, we like to go up over the border to buy things from the Hutterite colony that's right over the border in Canada. And there's this guy at the border crossing they call the Silver Fox. And he seems like he's stuck with the Elvis look, and he's always flirting with the ladies. So this is kind of like what I see people do when they see him. This is kind of a bigger version, kind of blown up version. Indigenous Elvis works the medicine line. Indigenous Elvis toes an invisible boundary, signed into being there but not there. Indigenous Elvis works the border crossing, laser scan checks your tribal ID, lifts your hatch and checks your stash of Saskatoons and Hutterite rugs, gently crooning. We are here together. You can go on together. We are high, suspicious minds. Stuck as a needle, skipped as a disc. We are here together, caught in a trap together. Indigenous Elvis works the border crossing, leans deeply into the window, wafts his manly scent a moment, asks, "Is this your car? Where are you from?" Indigenous Elvis unhitches your inhibitions so you giggle. I'm from Minnesota. It's my husband's car. I'm married. Indigenous Elvis breathes deeply through one nostril, squints away, waves okay while you struggle with the gears, his voice rich in your ears. We are here together. Don't you do anything but we are here together. Indigenous Elvis works the border crossing, toes the invisible being, boundary signed into being, birthed by a signature, there but not there. Big medicine. Don't you, with suspicious minds. He dances to a flashing indigo tune into blue suede shoes. We are headed together. Dances to a dot you can't help but watch, dwindles to a shimmy in your rear view mirror. So there's a little film of that live action film, not animation, that Elizabeth Day made with actors having fun. They're just having fun and making it look like the Indigenous Elvis is just taking that young woman apart who's trying to get through the border crossing. And there's a bunch of series of those poems where Indigenous Elvis is TSA agent, and that's actually the only one that's really true, is that there's this guy, TSA agent, I know him, he's a friend of mine, and he always like just really charms the ladies, and he's got big sideburns. One of the things that people make mistakes about and misunderstand all the time are lyrics to songs. Have any of you had like the song lyrics really wrong to something, and then somebody tells you, "Oh, you got that totally wrong"? Does anybody want to share a lyric that they got wrong? Come on, be brave. Up top.
My aunt, when she was little, would always sing, "I'll never leave your pizza burning."
Your pizza burning?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be beast of burden, right? But your pizza burning. I like that one. Another one?
I can't remember what it is, but the Killer song, human. It's like a dancer or something.
Killers. And what you say something dancer instead of
Something about being a dancer. It's not right.
somebody else? Can think of one? Do your parents ever sing the lyrics wrong to like songs they think they're cool and they're singing the lyrics all wrong? And you're like, no, that's not right. So, there's a word for when you misunderstand the lyrics to a song, and it's called Lady Mondegrins, and it comes from a hymn that the line is laid him on the green, and it's about Jesus' body, taking it from the cross, laying him on the green. But generations of people sang Lady Mondegrin, like who's Lady Mondegrin? And another one is a hymn about gladly his cross I'll bear, but people sing it gladly the cross-eyed bear. So they're called Lady Mondegrin, and there are a lot of them about contemporary songs. And at some point I realized that I was singing them all wrong, but it really fit with this theme of misreadings and mistakes and things that get left out in transit. So here's an autobiography, it's mixtape for Lady Mondegrin. All that I read, I misread. All that I heard, I misheard. My skull holds a bowl of spark soup imprinted with grooves that ripple briefly and remove their paths so faint traces remain. Yes, as if sparks in dark liquids could know or guess our first and most ancient medium, mud and sticks? Or no, our hands, the thumb of the beloved, gesture trace, mother's touch, creator's breath. What I have to say I've said in glyph and graph, incised, inscribed, sprayed, scratched, pen and pencil, ink and etching and charcoal. My hand is template for mammoth back and pregnant mare. All that I read I misread, all that I heard I misheard. Well, don't go out tonight, it's bound to take your life. There's a bathroom on the right. In the old folks' home, they'll know which grooves my needle sticks. They'll hear my full archive of mixed grooves, a mystery to the youth who marvels closely at cassettes and deck then says, music made with ribbons and magnets, what alchemy is this? What I have to say I've said, with correction fluid, X-Acto knife, wax and bray, with stylus and scribe, Commodore, Fat Mac, origami, rubber stamp, iron on, calligraphy, etch-a-sketch, and nib and quill and crayon. Blinded by the light, revved up like a douche. The runner in the night. What is Dirty Dean and the Thunder Chiefs. The archive of mixed grooved and all these labels meant to prove the thesis of my love. Remember, I gave one to you, but I kept one too. I had the kind of faith that duplicates even in those days when we gave it all away. What I have to say, I've said via telex, teletype, facsimile, fax, radio, in vinyl, postcard, sticky note, through the curled 12-foot cord of an old school teen line landline telephone. And then we just let it go. No record left of what it was we so needed to say. There was no curator of ephemera, though if there were, she would be me. My coil of copper, a heavy sheen in my hand, recording wire scored at an estate sale for 6 generation supporters, stacked hi-fi on top of hi-fi on top wireless routers and projectoscope. Beneath the dusty buttresses of slide viewers number 1 and 2 and many more, Panaview and sharper image wireless TV, analog tuned to perpetual static now. It comforts me somehow, the white noise of before times. We waited eternities for the grainy waiver of TVs, something called warming up that we had the patience for. Well, you promised to love me completely, baby, whatever happened to you? What I have to say, I've said. I've fed the ephemeral fountain at the new museum's center of the most recent wing, where all our instant messages reprint themselves in endless flickering, splashing, twinkling, chattering, blathering, and ranting, scattering like schools of tetras at the plot of trolls and stalkers. the limitlessness of light. Light once the essence of ephemeral, now how we groove the spark suit. All that I read, I misread. All that I heard, I misheard. What I have to say, let all the love that what I have to say, let all the love that what I have to say, I've said with light. What I have to say, I've said, yet never made my meaning known. Never the same message I sent, something always lost in transmit, lost and transformed by the limits of the limitless. That blinks back your I plus verb plus you, light of the love, that I found. How are we for time? We got left 15. Okay. We could try to put up that last. Yeah, there's one. It's I don't think we do. Let it sit here a while. Okay, I'm hoping we can get that one done. That's a new poem that I wanted to share with you. The poems in the back of the book they're sort of like love poems and weird poems about who does the laundry and who does the dishes, sort of things that help you stay married for a long time if one person does one or the other. Just giving you that advice, folks. Break up the duties. But in it, I also have some poems in Anishinaabemowin in our language, where I teach myself with the help of my fellow poet, language teacher, where I teach myself a little bit of how to pronounce Ojibwe words, and I made some little films so people can hear them too. Then I thought about the long line of domestic people, my mom, my grandma, and I thought of my great-grandmother who made a living selling herbs, helping women with their births on reservation, gathering cranberries and selling them by the side of the road, and making beadwork and selling it on trains. And Ojibwe beadwork is very complicated, has a lot of floral designs, and those designs tell stories, recipes, they tell medicines, they tell you what season to do something, some have maps in them. The older ones were intended to be sort of kept as memory devices and text, so I think they're very beautiful and made me think about what it was like to have lived on the prairie with bison hunters and then to live in a time when you had 13 kids and you were trying to provide for them by selling beadwork on a train. So I wrote a poem for her. And I also just want to say, somebody gave me this a long time ago, but I decided to wear it tonight because it's Rock Your Mocks Day, and I didn't have my mocks with me. So I decided we need a Model Your Medallion Day for the 70s medallions that are all getting dusty somewhere. Gotta bring them back. I love medallions. So I always think they're sort of like wrappers, you can kind of old school wrappers. Mine is actually subdued compared to a lot of them, so. But I love beaded medallions. Okay, so I'm going to read my little poem about where beadwork came from, and then we'll finish with looking at a short poem that I'll tell you about. What gathers? Twisting stems weave green to red against leaves raindrop shaped and tender. Shelter for blue, black berries. We taste pure purple. We gather. We touch our tongues to juice we've asked to grow for us. We children in our northern gardens gather dark sweetness of Saskatoon's indigenous fruit that taught Ojibwe beadwork patterns of vine and leaf. Winter's longing, worked by hand, reminder of a hot day to come. Promise, bright against threat. Doubtless that was part of it, what was gathering long ago, the rush of other, the great change, food, woods, bison, prairie, gods, songs, goods, all about to alter. We touch our tongues to summer. What gathers now, we do not know. some low rumbling at the globe's edge. We gather, nail tips and lip stain, we do as our blood asks. These berries, the same berries my ancestors plucked, rolling a thumb against the edge, curves, tasting, ripeness, readiness, old ladies joking, find me a man can handle a woman like that. Swoon in July sun and sensual acts the fruit asks. We do as it wishes, we gather, chilled still by long winter, always just behind us and always just ahead. So thank you for that. That's the end of my reading for tonight. And we'll finish with a poem in which we begin to look at the star stories, the Ojibwe star stories. If you know them, you can kind of see them. If you don't, it's a story that I asked to be made in a first-person shooter style, like as in a video game, and that it's about the way that human beings learned from wolves how to hunt moose, so that they're a brother, and Ojibwe people, we don't hunt wolves. It's a very important tenet of our way of being, and we protect wolves, and that's another thing that is very important to protect. We have stories that if we don't protect those wolves, then the end of times will come, essentially. So protecting the wolves is really important. The other thing I asked, besides the first-person shooter, was that the audio, the music artist, Trevino brings plenty auto-tune my voice to a wolf for one version and a moose for the other. So you can figure out which one it is by listening. Thank you. It's in Ojibwe in English. It says Ode Makan Art Line, Ma'ingin Makan the Wolf's Trail, which is the name of a series of stars across the sky. The way that the stars change during the years, that Wolf's Trail. And the moose is the same Pegasus in the sky.
If everybody put their phones on airplane mode, I actually put the bandwidth.
Wow, smart.
Odemikana, Heartline. Always following that one, always trailing. Ma'ingin Makan, the wolf's path in stars. Our first teacher, Ma'ingin, brother, the wolf. Always following that one, always trailing. Now you follow too. Our hearts align. What happens to one happens to the other. Odemikana, Ma'ingin Makan, heart path, wolf trail, starway. Through forever sky, animate universe. Now we animate, ecliptic Ma'ingin Makan, wolf trail, trailing moose, moves through deep eyes in the mirror of souls, the Milky Way, the way we humans know all it is we know. Knows, sister who gave all to humans, Anishinaabemowin. You follow too, you make a way, moose, Ma'ingin, moose wolf. Our hearts align. What happens to one happens to the other. Ode Makan, Ma'ingin Makan, heart path, wolf trail, starway, through Gagigegishik, forever sky, the animate universe. Now we animate. Overhead, that one follows, summer to fall, Nimin, Wagon, keep on move to find moose. You follow too, you make way. What happens to one happens to the other. Twin to mine, brother, our first teacher, your trail across our sky. We were pitiful, Ma'ingin. Then you showed us the way to moose, sister who gave everything. Food, clothes, sleds, shoes, tools, all we need to survive. Our hearts align. What happens to one happens to the other. Ode Ma'ingin Makan, heart path, wolf trail, starway, through Gagigegishik, forever sky, the animate universe. Now we animate all that we learn from you.
say one thing about that poem was installed in a 19-foot tall moose and a 19-foot tall wolf that were pedal powered, so when you pedaled them, the poem would come out, and they would light up, and they would throw their heads back if you, the wolf would howl, and the moose would shake its antlers. And they're beautiful, and they were made by Christopher Gardella Luder, and they were installed for a long time in various places in Minneapolis, and they're usually there for holidays. If you ever go to Minneapolis during the holidays, they're in the park making weird poem sounds. Any questions to end the evening with? I always wait a little bit in case somebody's being shy. Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering what set you on the path of writing, and was there like a specific moment where you realized that your words would be powerful enough to create such a message with the poetry?
I don't think that has happened yet. Have I ever had a moment where my words were powerful enough? I just keep trying. I think any of you who do art or any skilled thing, you can't stop yourself by saying it's not good enough yet. You keep working to make it better, but you got to start somewhere. You have to feel like you can join the conversation. I think that the more I read poets and spent time with poets, the more that I felt comfortable adding my voice. But I've also spent a lot of my career doing things like helping other Native poets get their work out. This is my most recent book. It's called New Poets of Native Nations, and it's 21 poets who have a close, strong tie to their Native nation. So none of the phonies who are out there are in this book. And it is people who had their first book published since the year 2000. It's the first Indigenous Native Nations anthology since 1988 that has come out from a literary press. And it just was named one of the top 5 poetry books of the year by the Washington Post. So that's really a testament to the amazing poets in here. So don't think that I don't represent Native poets. I'm not like most of them, and they're not like me. So take a look at the book if you really want to see what people are writing out there. They're an extremely diverse group of 21 poets. Some of them, these poets are getting the highest prizes for poetry in the country right now. So yeah, I just keep trying, and if you don't think, you can't think about art too much, or you'll get caught up, right, in the anxiety of influence, that sort of thing. So yeah. Oh, Dee! Oh my goodness, Dee Sweet is here. Dee Sweet, the former poet laureate of the state of Wisconsin.
What is your next project entailing, and how often do you try to incorporate with other artists?
I collaborate with other artists an awful lot. Right now I'm working with the Seneca choreographer Rosie Seamus on a work called Weave, which is about the interdependent nature of life. And it's all made with Native and Indigenous artists, and we have come together to create dance work. So I don't dance, they don't make me dance, but I create words that they use for the sort of soundtrack. You don't even recognize what I'm saying. There is a composer who uses my voice to create a sort of soundtrack. And then we install the words in various ways with visual art in the foyer of exhibits and so forth. So that's what I've been working on with Rosie, and that's going to premiere January 12th. And along with it, I've worked with dancers, which you'll appreciate, you're a dancer, surprised to find myself working with dancers for about 12 years now, and I've created a bunch of poems for dancers to use in their productions. And I've got a little chapbook of poems called Verb Animate, and this one that you just saw is part of it, the idea of what is animate. We have this notion of animism in our language. We don't have gender, but we have animate and inanimate, and the idea that the universe is animate. So I'm just exploring that while I work on animate forms with dancers, because they work with movement, right? I work with light on light, and they work with movement. It's just another one of those kind of things to think about. So thanks for asking, Dee. And then after that, I have a collection of poems that's almost done called Little Big Bully, but I don't know who's going to publish it yet, if anyone. and a book of essays, but yeah. I just don't stop. Can't stop, right? Gotta keep going. Anybody else? Any last questions? All right, I can answer your questions while I'm signing books too, so where will I, right here to sign books? All right. Thank you so much to everybody who made this happen.
So before we close, I want to say thank you for coming and join us tomorrow. Some of Heid's recipes from her cookbook will be featured in the caf at lunchtime. So if you still have no flights and custom cash, feel free to join us in the Ruth Marketplace. And then her lecture on her book will be at 3:30 in Fort Howard Theater across the street. So thank you.